to the controller? So would that make it?
It's a great question because you have a hop, right? It just depends on how you program it. Again, similar, and I wish I still had more board space, but similar to where I had the RIB, the routing information base, that leveled down to the forwarding information base, the controller has a flow table that once it learns the direction it's going to pass it to, it takes it down to the hardware level onto that ASIC. So every time it receives a packet, it doesn't have to go ask the controller. The controller is just making a large oversight decision that it then tells it to. And the forwarding information base on the ASIC will hold that information for an amount of time. There's a hard stop, sometimes 120 seconds, or there's a timeout. So if you stop communicating for so long, then it removes it from its forwarding information base. So honestly, maybe a little bit, but I mean, at what cost? And that has a lot more to do with programmability than in execution than with just simple hardware. So, but it's a good question, and it's one I want to look more into. So, all right. Well, I've beat these two topologies to death. I am going to explain 1/3 definition of SDN. It's important you know this because people talk about it equally to these other two. In 2012, VMware bought a company called Nicira for $1.05 billion, a large investment. Why? Because Nicira developed software that allowed virtual switching to take place. Microsoft and Cisco also have something similar to this. Cisco calls it VXLAN, and Microsoft calls it GVRE, or something similar to that. And if I've misquoted the acronym, I'll correct myself towards the end. And essentially what this does is it takes a new look at doing switching. What if, instead of using hardware to do our switching, we did it at a software level? So I'm going to try and get away with this down here, but if at any point this becomes a little too muddled, I can move it up. So here we have a network. Well, I'll switch here. Here we have a network, and instead of having switches, these are servers. So again, please remember that this is not a switch. There are no hosts connected to this server. This is the end server. And on the server, you have virtual machines, right? Well, the virtual machine is essentially nothing more than a software-defined machine that exists on the server using a hypervisor. VMware, through the purchase of Nicira, said, well, what if instead of inundating the network with all of our communication, what if we took care of all that on the server level? What if with software, we communicated, because how many people have heard that 60 to 70% of traffic is east-west traffic, right? You don't have to go north and south. What if we communicated below the network? So imagine down here, I mean, you have your switch here. You have your switch down there, but here you use something called tunneling. And tunneling is not proprietary to VMware or Cisco or Microsoft. Tunneling is a protocol that we've known for a while, about 4 years. And they use something called tunneling to communicate with other VMs. And these are physically connected with Ethernet cables. So the servers are connected with Ethernet. Then the server can then communicate with other servers without having to go down to the network. So it's software defined because it's using software to create a virtual switch on the hypervisor. And it's innovative because it's removing the need for communicating with the hardware above it. If you go to Gartner and look up people who are leading the market in switching and routing and in software-defined networking, you'll see that Cisco obviously is in the leader quadrant for most of those. Jump specifically into SDN. Cisco and HP, neither of us are in the leader quadrant. We actually sit right on the cusp of it. Below us, in the innovator box, you'll see one dot that is way more innovative than the rest, but lacks the ability to execute. That's VMware. Because VMware has really taken this on and ran with it, and it's made an incredible offering with an easy management system that people think is incredibly innovative. Because it takes an entirely different look at the way that we do switching and forwarding of packets. Although with everything, there is a caveat. Tunneling can only happen with the VMs that are on its tunnel. So whereas now we used to have shared fabric, like everyone can share the same Ethernet, you can share the same Ethernet, but you're only sharing it to the other tunnels or other VMs that are on your tunnel. So green can only communicate with green, brown can only communicate with brown, and black to black. So when you provision the communication of those virtual machines, you kind of have to have a bit of a idea of who's going to be communicating with who, if that makes sense. So if you have finance applications running on different servers and they need to communicate with each other, then you'll provision the virtual switch to put all those on the same tunnel. So at the end of the day, it's an innovative and interesting take on packet forwarding, but it's far away from becoming anything that we would standardize on. HP again sits behind OpenFlow. I encourage you to read a lot about this information because it's exciting and I think it's going to drive us at least into the 30 and 35% market share of SDN. And against Cisco, that's incredible. Know about Open Daylight and its capacity of 200 switches because that's their big broken leg whenever you go and you discuss that with the customer. And finally, be aware of the other definition of software-defined networking with Nicira and VMware, and know that that can also be thrown out, and you might be talking about A and they're talking about C. So if anyone has any questions at this point, I'm happy to answer them before I jump into my review of our activities. Good. All right. Just really quickly, I've lived my entire life on my sleeve, so I tell you all constantly what I'm thinking about anything and everything that we're doing. So I'm just going to go through three things, and Matt, I'm glad you're here because I'm really speaking to you. But the first thing I want to talk about is our the Visio and our most recent sales builder trainings. I love that. I've spent my entire time at HP watching essays do that, and now to know how to do it, I honestly feel like I just got my driver's license. Like, we're going to be doing that for the next, however long you're with us. That's all, not all you do, but a majority of what you do is sales builder. And whether you did it on purpose or not, Matt, putting it, I think, at 3 months or 2.5 months mark is great because you're not alienated by not knowing the products. Because now you know a little bit about what you're doing and you know enough about how they connect. So I think we would be lost at learning how to connect in Visio and more of, well, what is this connection? Is that fiber channel, Ethernet, and what do those mean? So now that we have that basis, that's a good time to introduce those skills. In addition, I wanted to just conglomerate all the 101 trainings that we had. I really enjoy them myself. The only thing I'm going to mention at all is that going forward, and we've been exercising this over the last few trainings, is I hope we have a hard 1 hour break time for 5 or 10 minutes. There's a reason why no university class goes for more than an hour and 15 minutes without a break, and it's because they've done research to identify the maximum amount of time that someone has an attention. And I'm not excusing people sleeping, but I, like many of you, will zone out. And so whether I'm awake or not, I may not be giving you my full attention, and even if you have my full attention, I may not be comprehending it as well as I could be. And finally, I'll end on my critique, Speakeasy. Sorry for those of you who love Speakeasy. I personally saw some value in it, but not enough to justify the price of Speakeasy. If you've ever Googled how much Speakeasy is, it's a lot of money. And I'm sure we get a corporate discount, but if you take into it as your own money, as that's how I like to view HP assets, I essentially paid several hundreds of dollars to learn about a very specific type of presentation, and I felt that more than half the morning was spent learning about my faults, which I'm very well aware of because we had Lou Gold present that to us. So I think some of the lessons were redundant. I do think it's helpful, but my question is at what cost? So next year I think I would just bring in another Lou Gold, maybe not Lou Gold, someone with a different perspective, and have them be here for a week. So I just felt like half the class was wasted to review in self-reflection, which we've spent many a time doing. So at this point, I want to appreciate your all's time. A lot of you have been giving me your eye contact. I know that I really appreciate that because I know that this isn't easy to do with everyone presenting. So again, thank you, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. All right, thanks guys.